So why listen to me about any of this, especially when I've just mentioned that I've only recently started using these products or these tools. I've done a lot of infrastructure. Systems that I've created are currently managing somewhere around 2 billion lines of code, and I've been in the DevOps, configuration management kind of system space for a little while. And in a previous life, I did a lot of motocross work, and I actually can jump a motorcycle 75 feet, which I think qualifies me for pretty much everything I've done ever since. So I found myself in front of a terminal about little less than a year ago, trying to install Chef and Puppet on some hardware, and was having a really tough time. Versions weren't working, installers were broke, documentation didn't look like it was complete. Sort of normal stuff. Wasn't that big of a deal, but it did cause me to start looking for alternatives. And what I noticed was exactly this: a bunch of mentions of Ansible, which prior to that, I'll admit, I hadn't really known too much about, and Docker, which obviously I already did know about. There was a bunch of mentions, and when there's this much, and you'll see this here in a second, you owe it to yourself to research it and kind of figure it out. So that's what I did. The context may be helpful. I went back and kind of plotted this out actually just a few days ago. I hope I've got the dates mostly right. If you notice any glaring issues, let me know afterward. I'll fix this. But pre-07, nearly everything that people were doing with systems or configuration management, systems management stuff, at least in my experience, was with one-off scripts. Few of these were documented. Almost none of them were under source control. Again, in my experience, I've seen this repeated, this pattern. And nearly none of them were what I would consider to be well-engineered. They were, fix this thing, fix it right now, make something happen right now, and we'll fix it later. This is good enough. 2008 to 2011, Puppet and Chef emerge, and they're attacking this problem space. And there was, a lot of broad adoption. They did a lot of things right. They made a lot of these issues go away, or at least kind of brought them under control. Somewhere around maybe 2011 or so, 2012, it happened. I don't know when it happened. The tools kind of started to take on characteristics of the stuff that we were trying to manage with them. And that is, they became large, became somewhat bloated, and they were hard to install and use. Kind of coming back to the slide before, this search query here has gone from 0 to like a lot in 6 months. And, take a look at this chart, which is actually, a screen capture from a Google trend on the query Ansible and Docker. I think this is kind of extraordinary. I mean, look at this. This is, just nothing. Obviously, they, didn't exist before too far back in this timeline. But going from 0 to, statistically interesting to Google in this trend is something I'm going to pay attention to. I kidded Solomon earlier that I was comparing Docker to a spaceship, sort of. So they took off. Interest in Docker and Ansible together took off, just like the straight line. That's the correlation I'm trying to make here. Nothing, boom, just like a rocket. Why is this the case? This isn't a tutorial. I'm not teaching you how to use Ansible. That's more than covered both here at the conference as well as a ton of resources online that I'll make mention of here in a bit. They're easier to use and produce portable and immutable outcomes. The way that, I like the way that Solomon described it earlier this morning. It's packaging your application so that it's portable. You know, your entire application is just everything that is needed for it to run and behave the way you want it to behave is right there. And that's, I've taken that notion of container, and so I'll say container when maybe I should say application. SSH, LXC, and C groups facilitate this, and that's it. The next few slides, I'm going to point out, you know, what I think makes Ansible and Docker a more approachable solution to configuration management, systems management stuff inside an enterprise. This is probably you know, this would be the summary if I were doing an exec summary for C-levels or VPs who are budgeting for this stuff, and I do that a lot. I'm going to point out that you can configure the environment once. You know, this is the kind of the promise of Docker. Put everything that you need for the application and for the application's environment, configuring the application, put it in your Docker file, build your Docker file, and boom, you're done. And you know, that sounds a little cliche, but it's pretty close to the reality. I would argue that that is the reality. Ansible makes this pretty straightforward in that you can pull a Docker file, using Ansible, you can pull a Docker file out of Git or HG or whatever your source control of record is, build it and start it from a single playbook that's easy to read and understand by anybody. And I think it was it in Peter's talk where he asked the question, hey, what does this do? And first person who answers correctly gets a candy bar. The playbooks are super easy to understand. Anybody in this room can walk up to, even if you haven't used Ansible before, you can walk up and figure it out really, really, really quickly. The obvious question might be, or the obvious next question might be, well, how does that help me if I need to do, you know, runtime configuration or stuff that has to happen after I start up my application or after I start up my container? You know, you can plop that stuff into your playbook very easily. Peter had a few examples, and I'm glad that his was as technical as it was because I didn't really want to overload mine with that. I like talking at this level. I can talk down, you know, at the command line level if that's, you know, if that's useful. But I'm much more interested in why we're doing things as opposed to necessarily how. Because we can figure out how. If we understand why we're making choices, we can figure out how to do that, how we can actually implement stuff. By the way, Ansible is currently doing a lot of work. They may have just announced or just released something around what they're calling some tight integration with Docker. So I'm looking forward to that. It may have already been released, I'm not sure. And then the kind of the last really super wordy slide is, this gets a lot of people excited. Both positively and negatively, this particular slide. When I say the need for complex client-server arrangements, boom, all sorts of bells and whistles go off, and people are either very gung-ho and you know, defensive of the server and the agent arrangement because that's how we've done a lot of stuff for a long time, or they're very happy about not having to do that anymore. The pre-conference kind of interest in this talk surprised me a little bit, but it seemed to be kind of coalescing around that, you know, kind of pendulum swing between opinions on those approaches, perhaps, my perception at least. With Docker, you can describe the entirety of what you want your system to look like once. It's a completely self-contained application. Ansible can then bootstrap that from a single playbook in under 20 lines of description. And notice I'm not saying scripting, I'm saying description. I'm newly enamored of that definition. Ansible playbooks are descriptions of things you want to have done. I could stop the talk right now. And I actually contemplated deep sexing the rest of the slides after this one for this reason. The kind of the inflection point, I think, is what's interesting here. And I think people are grumbling because of it. What are people saying about Chef and Puppet? These are real quotes from real people. I'm not going to attribute them to specific people for maybe obvious reasons, but these are, this is kind of what's going on. All right, and this is the part of this is part of the presentation where I had previously had a bunch of playbook stuff, and I was very excited about it. And there's just, look at this. I mean, there's 38,000 tutorials already, or tutorial-like results for Ansible. Almost 400,000 tutorial results for Docker. There's a bunch of information out there. You can find what you need, probably exactly what you need, to get something real done right now. And, me putting it on a slide is not going to make any difference to that. And as I said earlier, I'm not interested in providing a tutorial per se. I'm interested in pointing out this is we're at an inflection point. This is kind of important if you pay attention to it. Here's what I think is important. And my little joke is, are you on the edge of your seats yet? I know that I go into speech mode. Sometimes I have a monotone voice. Maybe that's not terribly exciting. I could tell old motocross stories. Maybe that would liven things up here. But here's what I think is important. There is a lot of work just to get these technologies installed and working. If you already have them running, great, you're way ahead of the curve. That's perfect. I'm not telling you to go remove that stuff, but I'm telling you to take a look at the energy and the time and the money that you're currently spending on managing this stuff. If a new, if a junior engineer walks up to a system and says, and he or she is super motivated to automate a bunch of stuff, and they've heard about Chef, they've heard about Puppet, and their first experience is a really poor install experience where they've had some of these experiences that I pointed out. That's kind of a non-starter. It's going to be a bad deal for them. So is this an opinion or is this fact? I'll let you kind of decide for yourself. So I thought, well, is it just perception or is this really more difficult to install? Because I've been doing this for a long time, and I had trouble with both Chef and Puppet during my most recent experience. And that was kind of the seed for the theme of the talk. It's like if a really super motivated, experienced engineer can't figure this stuff out, what's wrong? Is it the engineer? Okay, well, maybe. Is it the documentation? Maybe. Is it the product itself? Maybe. Maybe it's a little all of that. I don't know. But I think this says a lot. Look at this. This is word count on these pages. If you don't believe me, go look at it. This is super easy to look at. There is no Ansible client install. you don't install anything for the client, excuse me. To start using Ansible, to install it, you clone the repo, you create an inventory, and you're ready to run ad hoc commands. You can start writing playbooks. You can get as complex as you want, like Peter pointed out, or you can just start doing stuff. You can teach yourself how to use Ansible 10, 15 minutes, possibly less. To install Chef, you're downloading, and I'm conflating Chef and Puppet. You want to throw tomatoes for that? Go for it. To install Chef, you're downloading the right client and the right server installers. You're installing those, you're connecting them, and then you're writing scripts. And then you're testing stuff. So the lead time between deciding to do something and actually getting something done is quite a lot higher. There's also a big difference in the design philosophies. Now, this isn't a big surprise. There's nothing necessarily right or wrong about either one of them, but the difference is worth pointing out. With Ansible, if a target box, a box that you want to orchestrate, you want to do something to or on or with, if it's got SSH running and you've got credentials, or you can connect to it, you can do stuff with it. And that's not the case with Chef or Puppet. It has to have a running client on it. And there's, you can get elaborate and bootstrapped stuff. That's cool. You have to create all that, though. With Ansible, it just works right out of the box. If you listen to me talk about Ansible for more than a few minutes, you're going to hear me probably repeat this one. Ansible is agentless. That's very interesting. It means that I can walk up to a set of systems. I only know the name or the IP address, and I know that there's some master credentialing where a specific user will have, login access to these boxes and start making things happen. Chef and Puppet, again, not the case. Ansible's goal-oriented tasks ensure that work is completed by enforcing state. You saw, I'm pretty sure that you saw this with some of Peter's slides as well. The states are installed, running, removed, et cetera. Those are unambiguous declarations of the end state that you want the thing that you're managing to be in when you're done. And if it's already in that state, you're done. There's nothing to do. Chef encourages that, but it doesn't enforce it. And I know that they're working on this piece right now, so if this is technically incorrect today, let me know later. Excuse me. Ansible playbooks are simple data descriptions. And Peter showed this pretty well. And the point that I made earlier, that you can walk up to an Ansible playbook, read it, and figure it out, just like you're reading a story or a newspaper article. Joe Blow was standing at the corner and he saw a red car. You get that. It's language. Chef recipes, Ruby scripts, not a big deal if you know Ruby. And I'm not slamming Ruby. I don't care. I know Ruby. Probably half the room knows Ruby. But if you don't know Ruby, it's a big deal. It's a barrier. It's a barrier for you being productive with these other tools, okay? Most of the sysadmins that I've encountered over the years have been, very comfortable with bash scripts, very comfortable with SH, very comfortable with one-off solutions. Not a lot of them knew Ruby. Not a lot of them still know Ruby. You say, well, that's not the case. It is the case, and it's a big deal. So what about Docker? The other half of this talk was, why Docker and, is important as well. this really is it. This is just such a straightforward way to talk about this. Everything required for the container, for the application, like Solomon pointed out, is in the Docker file. It ensures the base state, and it's an immutable. Figuring out what is in a VM or a bare iron box, which Chef and Puppet have historically been targeted at, is really difficult. I talked to somebody last night at the tap room about why this happens, and he had a tough time believing or accepting or understanding perhaps that VMs and the state of a VM can and do float. If you're using a library of VMs, large enterprises do this. Licensing is such that you have like a core library of VMs. This is very, very common. VMs get used and reused and reused and reused, and the stuff that's on them, both the versions and the total number of things, floats. It drifts over time. Docker container makes that problem go away. It blows it out of the water. I mean, if you can implement tight controls on your VMs, you can make this problem go away as well. But I haven't yet found an enterprise that does. Speed matters. If anybody really disputes that this is not kind of a key differentiator, between Docker containers and VMs, I want to hear the argument in favor of that, or why this is not something I should pay attention to. And I mean that genuinely. I'm not trying to be snarky. I want to understand why that would be advantageous. So yeah, blah, blah, blah. I could go on and flap a whole bunch more about this, but these are the key points. This is what I'm trying to communicate right here. This is why I think Ansible is important and it's useful, and it's going to make Chef and Puppet kind of, not useful. What about Docker? Bingo, this is it. I'm using slightly different wording, but this is exactly what Solomon said this morning. Docker containers are immutable and reusable. You capture your application, everything that you need to know or configure about your application, you put it in your Docker file, you create your Docker container, and you have a portable, immutable instance of that application that you can carry around with you wherever it needs to go. And that's a big deal. That's pretty powerful. That's what got me excited about this. And when I noticed that Ansible also did this new thing, it only uses SSH, it's totally agentless, then I got really excited and decided to do some other things that we're working on. So here are a couple of the references I've used for this. I've tried to keep this talk, even though it's highly opinionated, I've tried to keep it fact-based. So if you want to dig into any of this and kind of understand what might have influenced some of the slides that I put up here, you're welcome to do that. And I appreciate your time. And anybody have any questions, I'm happy to answer that. Except, do not ask me anything about motocross. I hate talking about that.
I don't know. We'll try to do this. I'm going to get your mic back. Okay, questions? Was this gentleman right here, right?
Okay, so it's all Ansible's all SSH. That was actually presented to me as the biggest problem as why our enterprise can't adopt Ansible, because we would have, there's a big push to get away, at least at this particular place, to get away from SSH access. They want to use the agents from a security. Can you speak to that, please, and give me some great punchlines I can use, perhaps? Thanks.
So if you're wanting to control, you're wanting to control access, you can certainly do that and still use SSH. Ansible can use both keystroke supplied passwords. It can use it uses key-based. I want to call it passwordless, but that's not entirely correct. If you have credentials, I mean, you're wanting to orchestrate a machine, okay? You have to get access to that machine somehow, okay? So you have an identity on that machine that allows you to do stuff, right? So I personally don't get why that's more complicated or difficult or presents any additional security challenges, but I'd have to think about that a little more. I mean, if the mandate is no SSH, I don't know how to get around that.
Any other questions? This is a little loud. We've got two right here. Okay. This is a very sensitive mic. I would hold it right about here.
This may be slightly off topic, but I understand this approach you want to take if you're dealing with production stable applications that you want to put into a Docker and put into Dockers and deploy them. What about in a development environment where you've got some continuous integration going? Would you also use this approach to create new Dockers every time there's new code, there's new code changes? Because I would like to be able to see continuous integration using Dockers in my dev stage, QA, and production environment.
So I do that currently. The short answer is yes, and the longer answer is you can use Docker containers pretty much anywhere. I know that sounds pretty cliche, but you can. I haven't bumped into anything where I thought that a Docker container would be useful, where I haven't been able to use it, and that's a very 30,000-foot answer. More specifically, if I have a product or service or app that I want to continuously deploy after changes to an environment that I don't want to have to contact anybody else to get it, provisioned or anything like that. I want to just fire it up, kind of like, at the end of a Jenkins build, I want to do a deploy, and I want to do a deploy into a very specific version of WebSphere or WebLogic, very common in enterprises, or Tomcat, or some variation thereof, and in a particular instance of a database server. And I want exactly and only the environment that is of interest to me every time. I'm going to capture that stuff, capture those requirements in a Docker file. I'm going to put that Docker file into my project alongside the rest of whatever the hell it is that I'm building. And at the deploy step in Jenkins, okay, I'm going to fire off, and I do, in fact, fire off Ansible to build the container, which, it's a Docker file, and it's under source control. It's the Docker file I wrote, so I know exactly what it's going to produce. I know exactly where it's going to produce it, and I can control it, and I can tell Ansible to turn it on effectively and run my tests. And Selenium then goes off and has this environment in which it can run its tests. And then when I'm done, I just delete it. It's nothing I need to have stick around. I'm interested in the results. I'm interested in the outcomes. I don't care about the container. I don't care about I don't care about any of that stuff. That's totally transient. I'm interested in the outcome. Did this pass? Did we have regression? Did this deploy properly? Those are the things that I'm interested in. I don't care how we got there. This makes how we got there a lot easier, faster, and immutable and reproducible.
Ansible, but one of the things that drives me nuts is that modules can get stuck, and you can't see standard out and standard error. And I have not figured out how to debug that. And I don't know. I mean, do you ever see that?
I haven't yet. Have you seen this? So how do you fix it? See how this works?
There is no simple answer right now. There is an issue that's open and on a mailing list, so there's some conversations going back and forth. There's a thread of how this is how we would go and get standard out and information about what the module is doing, but no one has yet agreed on how to do that. Is it something that you only do and you want to debug a single instance? What if you're running against multiple instances? How does that work? So join the conversation. That'd be my recommendation. Reopen it.
Definitely reopen it.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Right. Oh, we have one. Okay.
Hello, hello.
So it sounds like most of this is based on the idea of preventing machine drift over time. What if you're doing auto-scaling or rebuilding your VMs regularly anyway? Then do you really see a huge benefit to this? Because you already have a build step to produce like an AMI or something.
So no, I don't want to present this as a solution in search of a problem. So if you've got a chef-based or puppet-based plus VMs orchestration process that is working for you and it's working well, leave it alone. I mean, you've done a bunch of stuff right. You don't need to reinvent that. This is not necessarily. I'm not advocating reinventing the wheel. I'm advocating paying attention to what looks like a better way. And I'll go so far as to say it is a better way. It's a better way than every other chef and puppet installation I've seen. So if you've got one that's